Across the TLDR network, we've got pretty used to talking about the coronavirus. We've spoken in depth about the UK, EU and US responses to the outbreak, as well as looking at Brazil, South Korea, China, Italy, Hungary, France, Germany, Sweden, Portugal and Spain. That is to say that we'd like to think we're getting pretty good at identifying when a country is handling the crisis effectively, and telling the difference between bluster and genuine facts. So when we've been watching the current spike in cases in the US, we haven't been able to match that with the rhetoric coming out of the Trump administration. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the gap between what the US government is saying and the current science on the pandemic, and discuss the things that the Trump administration doesn't seem to understand about COVID. Before we get going, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. We regularly release videos on a variety of US news topics, from COVID to the current protests and 2020. So if you haven't hit the button just yet, and a lot of you haven't, please lend us a hand and make sure you get every update from us by tapping subscribe and ringing the bell. Super quick caveat before we get things going, and I know a bunch of you have already commented this down below, but we're not trying to single out the Trump administration and give the Democrats a free pass. And if you want us to discuss their handling of the crisis, then let us know by liking the video and commenting below. This time, we're just focusing on the Trump administration's response, because as the people in power, their attitude to the pandemic and their plans matter most. So we thought it was important to question their approach, as we've done with every other governing party we've looked at, regardless of where they sit on the political spectrum. So, before we look at the rhetoric and strategies, let's take a glance at the current situation in the US right now, because it's not been looking amazing over the last couple of weeks. Initially, the US was broadly unaffected by the COVID outbreak, and as such, the Trump administration took a light touch approach, downplaying the virus's effects as it spread around the world. But as time went on, and the death toll increased in the US and around the world, America entered the top 10 countries with the highest COVID death tolls. This upward trend continued until, as I'm sure you already know, the US became the country with the highest death toll in the world. However, it did look like there was some reason for hope. Thanks to the measures that have been put in place and the stay-at-home orders, the number of cases began to flatten and drop slightly. This drop was hailed as a great success by some, but when compared to other countries, it doesn't look like the most resounding victory. Regardless, if we focus on the states that have been hit hardest by the first wave of cases in the spring, New York, New Jersey, Louisiana, Michigan, Illinois and Washington, you can see that the outbreak has been handled pretty effectively, and that cases have dropped in line with the trends in other countries. The issue in the US is that other states are forming a second wave of cases. These states often weren't hit as hard in the first wave, but their cases have been ramping up, and doing so quickly. The states most affected by this recently include Arizona, Arkansas, California, Florida, North Carolina, Oregon, South Carolina, Texas, and Utah, which have all seen cases rise so rapidly that they're offsetting the positive results in the first round of states. So much so that we're seeing the national totals peak once again, reaching record daily case numbers, exceeding the totals we saw in April. So it seems like things aren't all that under control when you're looking at the national level. Sure, the original set of states have brought down their cases, but overall, with states reopening and some never totally locking down in the first place, cases have been able to surge yet again, reaching worrying peaks. While it is good news that deaths haven't peaked again, we know from countries around the world that the death rate lags behind the other data, as it takes a while for someone to catch the virus, try to fight it, and then eventually die. So if a spike in deaths is going to follow this spike in cases, we can't expect that to materialise for at least another couple of weeks. Anyway, that's the state of play in the US at the moment. The pandemic never truly stopped being an issue for the country, and it seems that some recent changes and attitude shifts at state and national level have allowed cases to rise once again. So let's take a look at some of the clips we showed up front, what the Trump administration has to say about the handling of the crisis, how America compares to the rest of the world, and what needs to be done about it right now. So it seems only right to start with the president, Donald Trump. During his now infamous Tulsa rally that took place last weekend, Trump discussed the coronavirus after making a rather controversial statement.
We've tested now 25 million people. Probably 20 million people more than anybody else. Germany's done a lot. South Korea's done a lot. They call me, they say, the job you're doing, here's the bad part. When you do testing to that extent, you're going to find more people, you're going to find more cases. So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please.
After the event, Trump's staff insisted that the president was joking, and Dr. Fauci and other medical advisors said that they'd never been asked by the president to decrease testing. That said, Trump seemed a little less convinced by the argument that he was just joking.
Were you just kidding, or do you have a plan to slow down testing?
I don't kid. Let me just tell you, let me make it clear. We have got the greatest testing program anywhere in the world. We test better than anybody in the world. Our tests are the best in the world, and we have the most of them. By having more tests, we find more cases.
Regardless of whether he's being completely serious on this occasion or not, Trump and other administration officials have often blamed the country's high number of cases on the level of testing that they were conducting, arguing that the US only led the world when it came to COVID cases because they were conducting the most tests, something that Trump reiterated in a tweet on Thursday. The problem is that this argument doesn't exactly add up. Sure, testing more people will almost inevitably lead to more cases being discovered, but it's also obviously not true that if we stop testing, there'll be fewer cases. Instead, we'll just be less informed about the cases that do exist. This is something that the director of the Harvard Global Health Institute, Dr. Yar, explained in an interview this week.
But we're seeing these resurgences largely because we opened up too quickly, and we opened up without the right safeguards in place. And I'm worried that we're going to see continuing increases in number of cases in the days and weeks ahead, unless we really take much more significant action. First of all, we have very good evidence that this is not just about more testing. Hospitalizations are going up. And we are clearly identifying more infections, and more people are getting infected. So it's not just about more testing.
So as Dr. Yar just mentioned, there's clear evidence that this is more than just about testing. What's also important to take into account is the positivity rate and the hospitalization rate. The positivity rate, as the name suggests, is the number of tests that come back positive. The World Health Organization recommends that lockdown measures shouldn't be lifted until the positivity rate is below 5%, something which many countries, including South Korea, Australia and New Zealand, have all achieved, all keeping positivity rates below 2. Now, you can obviously change the positivity rate by changing who you're testing, but the positivity rate in the US is still higher than all of these countries, currently at around 5%. And it's even higher in some states, like Arizona's 17%, Alabama 12%, Florida's 10%, Texas's 9%, and Georgia's 8%. These states might sound familiar, because many of the states are also the ones where cases have begun surging recently. So if states are conducting more tests, you'd expect this to water down the infection rates, as they're testing more people who aren't as acutely infected. But instead, the rates are actually increasing, which suggests that testing isn't increasing the totals, but instead, you just don't know how big the outbreak is just yet. Let's move on from the testing rate and the case rate and take a look at the death rate. As we noted earlier, the number of deaths hasn't spiked recently, something that Vice President Pence was keen to emphasize as a bright spot in a recent call with senators. The Vice President emphasized that because more young people have been getting the virus, they've been able to fight off the virus easier, and as such, mortality rates haven't risen. The core problem with this is something we've already touched on: the fact that death rates lag behind total cases. As it takes time for people to catch the virus, deteriorate and pass away, Dr. Fauci warned that deaths always lag considerably behind cases. And as such, we would expect to see a spike in deaths come July as a result of the recent spike in cases. So it's a little too soon to assume that we're out of the woods when it comes to deaths. Also, on the matter of young people catching the virus, Pence is absolutely right that they're less likely to die and add to the mortality statistics. But that doesn't mean that an increase in younger cases is in any way desirable. Young people might not die from the virus as often, but they can spread it just as easily, letting the virus proliferate and spread to older and more vulnerable people.
And then, of course, young people don't just stay among young people. They go spend time with their parents and grandparents and get other people sick. So I unfortunately just don't take a lot of comfort in those two pieces of data. I'm still pretty worried about where the trend is heading.
Finally, let's leave the executive branch, Trump and Pence, and take a look at what Marco Rubio has had to say about the outbreak. Rubio's approach appears to be more cautious than other Republicans, with the senator for Florida encouraging people to wear a damn mask. Now, these words surrounding masks are supported by the current scientific consensus, and we actually plan to make a video about this over on the UK channel, where we discuss mask wearing and the efficacy of wearing masks. A video we'll release in the coming days. But that doesn't mean that Rubio's optimistic outlook isn't still a little worrying to some people. It's certainly nice to hear good news, but some criticise Rubio's messaging for highlighting the good news at the same time as his home state, Florida, was experiencing significant increases in infections. Therefore, some see his remarks as playing into the broader Republican narrative of overstating how well the fight against COVID is going, something which could encourage more people to head outside, including those who could be spreading the virus, even asymptomatically. Going into the 2020 election, it seemed that Trump hoped to seek re-election under the banner of the economy. He pitched himself as the businessman who could make America win again. In fact, win so much that Americans grew sick of it. However, any economic growth that he's achieved during his presidency has been wiped out by the impacts of COVID, making a re-election campaign focused around the strength of the economy a little more difficult. It seems that because of this, Trump wants to get things going as quickly as possible, in order to regain some of that economic momentum heading into the fall. He's just hoping that COVID won't scupper that plan once again. What do you think about the Trump administration's approach to the virus? Do you think that they don't understand the issue, or that they're just choosing to put the economy first? Or do you think that they're handling the crisis well and balancing health and economic priorities? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, be sure to comment any other questionable COVID claims you've seen that you'd like us to discuss, especially those made by Democrats, so that we can make the other side of this video. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more updates on this and other US news topics. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible.